Going to take you live now to the opposition leader Anthony Albanese. He's holding a news conference in Sydney.
Goes across into Victoria and New South Wales tomorrow and Sunday. I'll be visiting South Australia tomorrow with the South Australian Labor leader Peter Malinauskas and with Penny Wong, and I'll be in Victoria on Sunday with the Premier Daniel Andrews. The fact is that at this time what we need quite clearly is a national response. The Prime Minister said yesterday that the National Security Committee will meet in a number of days' time on Monday. I'm not quite sure why it takes that long as a former member of the National Security Committee to convene a meeting like that. It can be convened, of course, by its very nature on very short notice. I do think that the failure of COAG to meet until March is not a circumstance which, in my view, is justifiable. What we need to ensure is that there is national coordination here. But our thoughts today are primarily on two issues. One, the people who are directly affected, keeping them safe. And secondly, of course, our firefighters, once again, inspiring their fellow Australians with their courage, with their commitment, with their dedication to each other and to their fellow Australians. Over many, many months, some of these people have been working hard, putting literally their lives on the line. And yesterday we saw, of course, at the tragic funeral, the farewell of someone who'd made the ultimate sacrifice. Happy to take questions.
How would you characterise the Prime Minister's response to this crisis?
Well, I'm not a commentator. It's up to others to do that. What my job has been is to listen to my fellow Australians, to care about my fellow Australians, to respect my fellow Australians, and I've done that to the best of my capacity. Throughout the recent months, and it has been months, I have been constructive and I'll continue to do so. In November, I called for COAG to meet in November. I called for the Prime Minister to meet with the former fire chiefs who have hundreds of years of expertise between them. I called for COAG to consider our aerial firefighting capacity. I called for a scheme to support our volunteer firefighters in terms of economic compensation. I called for a national disaster plan to be put in place. I called for climate change and its impact, including adaptation and mitigation, to be on the agenda. So for some time I've put forward practical suggestions. I'll continue to do so based upon the feedback that I have got on the ground. It was when I was in the North Coast, in Casino and Ballina and Lismore, that I first was made conscious of the fact that many firefighters, because of the early fire in Ratville and in the region, were desperate for some form of economic compensation. They were giving up receiving a wage, but they still had to put food on the table for their families. And that's why I raised that issue early on. And eventually we got there in terms of, firstly, an agreement for some form of compensation for Commonwealth public servants, which was already there, of course, in the award, but the removal of I guess, the option of the heads of department agreeing or not agreeing to that, and then a broader compensation scheme. We want to make sure that that people don't miss out on that. I expressed there is an example whereby that scheme, which was done between the Commonwealth and New South Wales, really should have been done as a national scheme, in my view.
Sorry, Mr Albanese, Scott Morrison is due to fly to India in 9 days' time on a state visit, both India and Japan. Do you think it's appropriate, given that we're going to be having funerals and the recovery will be ongoing?
Well, that, of course, will be a decision for him. I wasn't critical of the decision by the Prime Minister to go to Hawaii on the holiday. I stayed away from that, and I intend to continue to do that. My job is to perform a constructive task as leader of the opposition and leader of the Labor Party. I have done my best to do that. I have sought briefings, and I must say David Littleproud has been very good at providing those briefings and to try to help as well to inform the public about the dangers that are there to listen to. A shout out to the ABC for the work that the ABC are doing, I've got to say, in keeping people safe here as well. But the Prime Minister will have to weigh up whether it's appropriate for him to go or not. That's a decision for him.
Would you say this is a turning point in public consciousness about climate change and its effects?
Well, one of the things about this is that, unfortunately, the scientists have been proven to be correct. They said that the bushfire season would be longer and it would be more intense. They've also said that about other extreme weather events, including cyclones, which we're not in that season yet. So I think people know that this is not business as usual. And one of the reasons why we've seen, I think, some frustration expressed by people on the ground is they don't want to be told this is just a natural disaster. Yes, Australia has had natural disasters in the past. We haven't, in my lifetime, had people on beaches waiting to be evacuated in life jackets, sending boats out to sea, like it's a peacetime version of something that we've seen during wartime. We have not seen that. This is not business as usual, and it requires national leadership and a national response. This is a national emergency, and it's important that the response be appropriate to the scale of this emergency.
Has Scott Morrison done a good job in your view?
Well, I'm not a commentator. That's up to others to make that assessment, and people will make those assessments. My job is to do my best to represent the views that I've heard, to try and convey those and get some policy changes. And I must say, some of the initiatives that I've advanced have been adopted by the government over recent times. I say they should go back and have a look at the correspondence from 2 months ago, from November, and look at the range of suggestions that are in there. They're practical. I have tried to avoid political critiques because I think people don't want that at this point in time. They want people to be constructive, and I've been determined to do so.
So if that's the case, do you believe more can be done? I know Greg Mullins was on radio this morning saying that there are firefighting aircraft being mothballed in Canada at the moment in the middle of their winter, and we haven't put our hands in our pockets to bring them over.
Well, I met with Greg Mullins and the other former fire chiefs. I said, as part of the correspondence I've been saying for months, that the Prime Minister should meet with. It doesn't mean that you have to adopt every suggestion that's put forward, but we need to, at a time like this, listen to the experts which are there. I met in Rockhampton with a couple who are advancing, who've tried to get meetings with the government about a particular firefighting aircraft from Russia. We've forwarded that information onto the government to try to see that every asset that is potentially at our disposal is used. This is not a time to think that it's okay, near enough is good enough. It's a time whereby we need to exhaust every asset at our disposal in order to protect lives, to protect properties, and to do what we can to minimise what is a catastrophic event.
Is it the resources of the Defence Force being used effectively?
Well, in terms of my only concern here is that there seems to be an approach which is that people have to ask for support rather than a proactive sitting down, which would be what would happen with COAG, around the table and say what is needed. And certainly I think that defence assets, every one of them, should be at this time available. This is the scale of what is occurring here, of a mass evacuation, not from a town, from a region that is bigger than most countries in Europe. That is what we are seeing happening today and yesterday. The scale of this requires a national response, requires national leadership, and it requires all of our national assets to be used because this priority is that people are kept safe. We know that with 28 people missing in Victoria, there is more bad news on the way. We know that that's the case. And we know that people out there are genuinely scared. And there's a reason for that, because this is scary. And it's no point downplaying it. We, of course, need to be considered and measured in the response, and it's the role of leaders to do that. But we shouldn't be downplaying the scale of this crisis as just another event, because it's far from it. Thank you very much.
That's Opposition Leader Anthony Albanese. They're speaking on a number of issues, including that abuse we saw hurled at the Prime Minister as he visited a fire-stricken town on the south coast. He was saying that he's previously been supportive of his Hawaii holiday, didn't wade into that, but he is saying that there does need to be a stronger national response to the bushfire crisis, and that we do need to see more of a presence of the Prime Minister. Opposition Leader Anthony Albanese there.